So again, we feel quite fortunate that he is here tonight to talk to us about sort of the damage that was done to science over the past 4 years and what we need to do to correct that. I am anticipating that we're going to get some more folks um, as the minutes roll on, but we don't want to keep our guest waiting. He's in Washington, in the Washington D.C. area, where it's 10 o'clock, so we want to be respectful of his time. So with that, CD, I'm going to turn it over to you and ask you to make some preliminary comments, and then let's have a very robust conversation.
Sounds great, Bud. Thanks so much for the invitation, everybody. I don't mind that it's 10 o'clock, as long as you don't mind that I'm wearing a hoodie, and that it's going to be an informal conversation, I hope. As Bud said, my name is Sudip Parikh, and I've had the privilege of being the CEO of AAAS since the beginning of last year, January of 2020, and also executive publisher of Science. And as you can imagine, things have not gone the way they were supposed to go in my 30, 60, 90-day plan for the organization. About a month in is when I kicked everybody out of our buildings, and we've all been working from home ever since. I hope you have not been able to tell the difference between a science magazine from before the pandemic and one after. They are being done from home. It's amazing what is possible. You know, a journal that has been around for 120 years is publishing papers about retrieving grains of regolith from an asteroid, and is doing it from people's basements, from their kitchens, and from their living rooms. So it has not been as planned. Another thing that's not been as planned is working through the final year of the Trump administration and then into this transition. So we can talk about that quite a bit if you like. I've spent 22 years in Washington. I never planned to do that, but here I am. And I will be happy to talk about that. You know, Bud, I don't think I've ever seen Washington D.C. at the top of any list of places to live. So I think Washington State has definitely won out there. Well, just to kick off, you know, I testified to Congress about a week and a half ago, and it was in front of the House Science Committee, and then about 2 months before that, I testified in front of the House Budget Committee. So the Budget Committee obviously are the folks who are going to decide how much money goes into science. The House Science Committee is thinking about sort of bigger picture things about how we divide that money up, what's some of the authorizing legislation that might create new agencies or change the mission of agencies. And what they asked me to talk about was sort of the state of science as it is today at the end of 4 years of the Trump administration, in the beginning year of the Biden administration. And what I told them was, you know, it seems strange to say it, but here we are in the middle of a pandemic, and we are living in wondrous times. The pace of discovery and innovation has never been faster. We have seen the methane-covered mountains of Pluto. If you think about it, when I was a kid, 10 years ago, we would not, Pluto was 4 pixels in the Hubble telescope, 4 pixels. And now it is a place. It's a place that has methane-covered mountains. We've discovered the gravitational ripples that are caused by colliding black holes somewhere across the galaxy. We have detailed extensive changes to our climate and to our environment. We've advanced quantum computing, some would say to the edge of broader utility. Some would say maybe not, but we'll see. You all probably know better than I on that, living in Redmond. We've harnessed gene editing to the point where we are potentially going to cure sickle cell anemia within the next couple of years. There are a couple of patients running around right now that have had these gene editing treatments, and they have not needed a blood transfusion since they got the gene editing treatment. That's a miracle. If any science sufficiently advanced is a miracle, that's a miracle, and it's extraordinary. So we're living in these amazing times, not to mention the fact that we saw the thrill of landing on Mars in HD, right? So all that's happening, and that is amazing. And yet, we also live in uncertain times. We live in these uncertain times. We have these multiple intersecting challenges. And despite our failures, the failures of our public health system in response to the pandemic, the biomedical research enterprise, again, never moved more quickly. The fact that we are, my parents got vaccinated about a month ago is again, another miracle of our times. And just the number of submissions to Science Magazine about COVID-related progress and discoveries is extraordinary. 4,000 submissions to Science related to COVID in the past year. 4,000. We published less than 4% of those, but just the fact that there are 4,000 4,000 pieces of research that people thought should be published in Science last year related to COVID is amazing. But these multiple intersecting challenges all have the potential to become global crises. The COVID-19 is not the last time that science and engineering are going to be called upon to save the world. It's not in fact, the cadence of crises that are coming is only going to grow. And I think you all have seen that in terms of climate change, in terms of food and water insecurity, in terms of the need for clean energy. These are trying times, and then there's some challenges that still haven't even emerged yet. Goodness knows we should all be worried about antimicrobial resistance. I mean, it is just scary where these bugs are. The amount of the number of antibiotics that they can now get past. We risk returning to the time pre-antibiotics, and that should scare all of us. And so, the cadence of these crises means that science really needs to be sitting at the front ranks of policymaking in a way that it only has in the past during times of war and during the space race, right? In those times, there were scientists sitting at the policy tables, but that hasn't been the case until now. Hopefully we can touch on that. But we're at this inflection point. I truly believe this. I've been in town for 22 years in DC. We're at an inflection point, and all the successes that I just talked about, those are all lagging indicators of our previous investment, our previous policies, and our previous commitment to science and engineering, done throughout bipartisan administrations. To be honest, these things had support. It's funny, science. It's really funny. The investment in science is actually grows the most when there's a Democratic president and a Republican Congress. And the reason why, the big secret of that is Republicans don't want to invest in anything else, but they like science. At least they used to. And so they would invest in science even when there was a Democratic president who would sign those bills. But we're at this inflection point because we have a time of choosing. We have a time of choosing where this last administration did not follow the path of other administrations. Every administration, Democratic and Republican, finds somewhere where they want to either slow the science down or slow the transmission of that science into the popular culture for political reasons, right? You see it in Republican administrations, oftentimes on policies that are related to the culture wars. In Democratic administrations, you sometimes see it that way too. The Clinton administration, at the very end of it, they didn't want to talk about stem cells because they were worried that it was, they didn't want to get into the whole argument about embryonic stem cells. So they kind of punted to the Bush administration, which then held it up. Even the Obama administration, on Plan B, they kind of punted a little bit, holding back until they could, until they thought that the political environment was better. But those are small ball, okay? Those are small ball because at the top, the presidents, from you can go all the way back to Harry Truman all the way through, and they all at least tried to align themselves with good science. This last administration completely broke that wonderful thing that we had going for 70 years, which is that they at the very top decided they were going to they were going to not just not be in alignment with some of our best scientists in the government, but really be completely contradictory. When I had to write pieces that were defensive of Tony Fauci, I had to write pieces that were defensive of some really terrific scientists at NOAA. I had to write pieces that were defensive of scientists who were leaving the EPA, and that is extraordinary and has not happened in the modern era of U.S. government. So 2021 is going to be a crucible. This is an inflection point. Are we going to, what are we going to do about that? And I'm actually hopeful. I'm hopeful, and I'll give you a couple of reasons why. One is the pendulum swing on science being back at the table has been so abrupt it almost hurts. It's there's some whiplash there, because seeing the new president saying that the director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, the science advisor, should be at the cabinet table, that's new. That's new. Now I have to tell you, I used to work on the Appropriations Committee in the Senate, and so I believe money is policy to a large degree. And the science advisor will be sitting at that cabinet table with a budget of $5.5 million with an M dollars, and he'll be sitting beside the Secretary of Defense with $770 billion. He'll be sitting beside the Secretary of HHS, Health and Human Services, with $1 trillion. So there's still some work to do there, but still, it's progress. It's huge progress, because the cabinet table, let's face it, no work actually happens during a cabinet meeting. What it means is he or she can pick up the phone and talk to other cabinet members, and they'll take their calls, at least the first time. And we've got a good team that's been appointed to these positions. I don't know if you've been following, but you may have heard of Eric Lander. He's a well-known geneticist. And involved in the Human Genome Project. But the team that's been nominated is really quite something. The deputy that was nominated is Alondra Nelson. She was on our board at AAAS. She is a pretty incredible social scientist. I'd encourage you to look her up and see a talk or two by her on YouTube. I'd encourage you to look at the two co-chairs of the President's Council on Advice on Science and Technology. One is Maria Zuber, who is a longtime scientist at MIT, and the other is Frances Arnold, who's a Nobel Prize-winning chemist. These are two extraordinary scientists who are going to do a great job of putting together the President's Council of Advisors. And then I'm hopeful, because on the investment side, several things have come together to make this an opportune time. One of those is that everybody now is saying that they believe in science. Now, I want to come back to that, because even Donald Trump says we got to be following the science. And so we have to be really careful. We have to be really careful about what people mean when they say that. But they are all saying it. And so I was amazed, because I told you I testified in front of the House Science Committee. The Democrats and the Republicans were tweeting out my remarks about expanding investment in the sciences and rehiring all these scientists that left during the last administration, because there were a bunch that left. The Agriculture Research Service, the EPA, NOAA lost hundreds of scientists each in attrition in this last administration that goes well beyond the mean of all the other administrations. Now, some of that is the fact that the government workforce is aging, but it's not all due to that. So there's this opportunity, because the House Republicans, the Senate Republicans, the House Democrats, and the Senate Democrats all agree that there needs to be investment in science, and that's a good thing. I think we're going to get something done there in terms of an increase in budgets for the science agencies. Now, that's been the one bright spot throughout. Even during the last 4 years, investment actually increased, because the Trump administration was supportive of increases in NASA. And then the Congress was very supportive of increases in other science agencies, including NIH and NIST and other science agencies. But there were some that were left very far behind. EPA was hurt dramatically. NOAA was hurt dramatically, and there were others as well. So there's some rebuilding to do there. But I'm hopeful about the investment. On policy, they're all worried about China. Our politicians, they are all on various parts of the spectrum between it's a healthy competition to, oh my gosh, we're in the third world war. There's heterogeneity there, and that's across both parties. I've seen both parties sort of being in both of those places. That is, it's unifying in terms of the push for greater policies in terms of a national strategy, even on climate change. So we're talked about national strategies on batteries and on quantum computing and on artificial intelligence. But I think that there's a growing consensus, even on a few moderate Republicans, the ones that are left, to join with Democrats on climate change research policy. Now, the rest of it, in terms of big picture climate change policy, that's still there's a lot of work to be done there, and this administration is going to have to do a lot of convincing, even among Democrats, to get to good policy. But I think that this point of inflection, I'm optimistic that we're actually going to have a good change. The concern I have, and this is I'm going to end with this, is that the public. If you poll the public, Pew does this all the time and asks, do you believe in science? Do you trust scientists? The numbers are high. They're very high, 78%, 77%. But if you dig one level deeper, and if you say, what do you believe in the climate science? Do you believe in this? It becomes very, very partisan very quickly. And what you start to realize is what people are saying is they believe in the science that matches their beliefs. And that is a scary place for us to be as a nation. That's a place where the Russians were in the 50s about wheat. That's a place where you get yourself into big trouble because you start to believe in ideology over the data. And so we got to be really careful of that. And so, people often ask me, what are my prescriptions for that? And I've had a couple of very prolific philanthropists tell me, hey, can you help me create the next Carl Sagan to try and bring science, to bring the population back together again on science? And I love Carl Sagan. I've read every book. It is certainly compelling to me, but I'm 47 years old, and there's a problem. We're fighting the last war. If you think we need one person, we need hundreds of thousands of scientists who are willing to engage in their local communities, because what happens is you got to trust people, right? You can't build trust after the pandemic is hit. You have to build trust before the pandemic hits. And the only way that happens is whenever scientists show up to school board meetings and county commissioner meetings and PTA meetings, and are flying the flag of science in those places. Because I can tell you, at AAAS, we do a lot of local work, and we have people who don't believe in climate change and human created climate change, but they will work with us on climate disruption mitigation, because at the local level, they see it, right? You can see permafrost melting in Fairbanks. You can see changes in the behavior of fish that our fishermen are chasing off the Northeast coast and off the Northwest coast. And so we've got to figure out how to build those bonds of trust earlier. And so that's what AAAS has been investing in. We invest in putting scientists in Congress. So we have a program that puts 40 PhD or MD or master's level engineers into Congress for a year on congressional staffs. And there's nothing better, because when you're in the trenches in Congress, because the staffs are pretty small and they work really hard it's tough work. They build relationships that last for 40 years. And those relationships on both, you can walk across and say, I know you and I trust you, are really important. So we've got to do that. We also build programs with the faith community. So we put scientists in seminaries around the country, not because we find agreement on all things. In fact, we don't find agreement on some things, but it's important for us to have shown, first of all, that we value many of the same things in terms of a better future for our children, and a longer lasting and happy community. And then we're willing to talk about the science. We're willing to talk about embryonic stem cells. We're willing to talk about climate change. We might disagree, but we talk about it. We put scientists in the judicial system. So we work with the judiciary to have scientists do courses on artificial intelligence, climate change, and we're starting one on food and water insecurity, because judges make a lot of decisions that affect these issues. And so making sure that, again, we have scientists who know judges and judges who know scientists. And we also do this, we do this in the media. And so we put scientists for a year in newsrooms around the country, not just the Washington Post and the New York Times. We do have people there, but we also put them in local papers that are in Dallas, in Tulsa, in Anchorage. So we have scientists in each of those newsrooms because that's the only way to get decent coverage of science, is to actually have a scientist in the newsroom. So we've concentrated on those areas. But I think if I had my dream come true, it would be that we could have 100,000 scientists who are engaging in the community and who are willing to fight the battle hand-to-hand combat on social media, because there's no way for an organization like mine to respond quickly enough. So there's no way for us to be the firefighters of disinformation. It's got to be done hand-to-hand combat by 100,000 scientists out there who are engaging, because nobody is fast enough. These things spread much too quickly. But I'm hopeful. So I'm going to stop there. I've talked way too long. I apologize. We're supposed to be having a great conversation and drinking. So let's stop there. And I'd love to engage in a conversation. Again, thank you again for the invitation.
A great presentation. So by all means, let's start hearing from people. What are some questions you have of Sandeep?
All right, I have one. Sutup, thank you for joining us.
Sure.
I have a lot of problems with my species. We're the species that's able to put a lunar rover on another planet, but we're also the species where not all of us are convinced that the planet we're on is even round.
Yeah.
I think we have a big ASS problem. And I don't know how we solve that. I don't know if we're going to save the planet before we destroy the planet. So go ahead. How do we save humanity, and how do we fix stupid people? You have 30 seconds, go.
I love it, Glenn. That's you've thrown down the gauntlet. Well, hey, let me tell you, I don't know the answer, but what I will say is this: is that I have come across in my travels so many people who I would have said, what, this person is never going to get it. They're not going to be a part of the future. And what I've found is that 90% of the time, I can find a way to find common cause. We might not agree on the causes. They might not even believe in climate change, but I can get them to believe in climate disruption. I can get them to believe in adaptation and even mitigation if they don't realize that I'm talking about human-created climate change. On the round Earth problem, I got to tell you, Glenn, I have no idea where the hell that comes from. It's extraordinary, right? Here we are in 2021, and people still believe that the Earth is flat. And what I've decided is, throughout human history, it's been a rather small group of people that causes a lot of the progress. And so we got to work together to just push forward, and hopefully, again, having a large number of people who are willing to do hand-to-hand intellectual combat in a way that is that builds bridges is the only way I know forward. Because I know that the screaming doesn't get anybody on either side, and I get tired. But Glenn, I'm with you. There are nights when I go to bed and I think I'm not going to win this, but they're few and far between. Most nights I get to see people who are working so hard to make a difference.
I had a little question. You're talking about embedding scientists in news organizations. Have you had any success in getting scientists into Fox News? And a related question: how do you get the intellectual thing of the people that are not really scientists. How do you get them when they're in a cult? How do you deprogram them so that they would accept science?
Yeah, it's a tough one. First, on Fox News, we have tried. I will say that they have been they have been more open than we thought they would be. So I am hopeful. I've got my fingers crossed that next year we'll have our first mass media fellow at Fox. Now that is contingent on my finding a scientist who's willing to work at Fox, and that is I got to tell you, it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge, and you know what I often tell people is that, look, you got to be willing to go in the lion's den. You got, because they're going to see that you're a normal person, and you're going to see that, well, they're mostly normal people, right? You hope. And look, the problem is that you're not going to fix it with that. And so I have to convince a scientist who's going to be willing to spend a year working at Fox. But I'm trying, Dwight. So fingers crossed. If you know any scientists who'd be willing, let me know. And the rules of the game are they got to be just a year out of their PhD or their MD or their master's in engineering. On the second question of how do you deprogram, there's obviously some work in the psychological sciences that I'm the co-chair of a group of CEOs for all the scientific societies, and the American Psychological Association would have a lot to tell you about deprogramming. My 5-second summary of that is that the only way to do it is to, again, build trust on other things and then come around to the science part. You can't, if you start with the science, you're just not going to, you're going to keep doing this. And you got to build trust in some other way, either in shared interest in sports, shared interest in something, because you can't get them by just starting at the top.
Saduk, my name is Carol, and I'm a retired classroom teacher. I've taught all grades, K through 11, at least across the United States, following a military career. I want to tell you that
you have more patience than I will ever have. Thank you.
I certainly had a lot of fun. I really did. Science for me, I taught it in 4th grade and in 6th grade. And in 6th grade, I was here in Seattle, and the National Science Foundation had kits through the University of Washington. I can tell you that I had absolutely every eye and every ear in that classroom when we were doing those experiments. In fact, I got to the point that I would have whatever group of people, students, come in at recess time and have them give the experiment. I can tell you that it is such a grabber for interest in science. Even your failures are incredible. I mean, we could spend a week just going through the failure and what should have happened. Yeah. So I'm talking to you that I don't know if you have any connection to that or if there's a program. It was highly, highly loved by the students. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, Carol, you've caught something that is a hobby of mine, which is I firmly believe that every kid is a scientist, and they want to experiment. They want to try and understand the world. I coach Science Olympiad here for my 10-year-old daughters. I have twin daughters, and so I'm coaching right now, and they're having a blast with it. And you're right, the experimentation is what gets them. The NSF does still build those kits. NASA has kits. One of the problems that we have is that it's all very disconnected, right? There's little programs here and little programs here and little programs here, and they're pet projects of different congressmen and congresswomen. And we've got to figure out a way to actually create a national strategy and a national plan. So I've actually been advocating, one of the things I've been talking to on the Hill about is that we've got to actually, we have to have a plan, right? We don't have although we have huge investment, we don't have a plan. We don't have a national strategy for how to do this. And so one of the things that in the latest issue of Science, actually, a young scientist has suggested, we need something like an American Science Corps, something like that you could, that scientists could do a year sort of at schools around the country and be that person, Carol, who designs those experiments and really draws folks in. I love that idea, and because I do think we have this moment in time of getting more investment in science, I'm really hopeful that we can fund something like the American Science Corps, or just figure out a way to coordinate all the different activities of NSF, NASA, NOAA. They've all got those programs. They're just too small to have enough impact.
Well, they tended to be expensive. When I went out and got the, let's say, gas can and heated it, and then it collapsed, internally when we put the lid on it, and it cooled. It tends to be expensive if you're doing science all day. So there's got to be money behind it. I mean, as a teacher, I was paying that out of pocket. Yeah. And if we wanted to do it 2 or 3 times that week, in which I wanted to do too with them, I'm talking about how many gas cans did I have to buy, plus the Bunsen burner to rent it. And, it goes on and on and on. So, and the science kits from the university came with the knowledge, but not always the supplies. Yeah. So it's money funded, but thank you for what you're doing. The science fairs were mostly parents. That was okay too, but not like being in the classroom and the kids doing it themselves.
Yeah, and you know what it does, Carol? Is it unfortunately it makes it to where only parents who have the time and the resources to do these things can do them, right? And so we lose out. We lose out on all these smart children who are unlucky enough to be born either in rural America or in the inner city, or without the means to pay for their parents to go out and do this stuff, or the time. Maybe they work weekends or they work evenings and they can't volunteer in that way. And so we miss out on just a huge percentage of our population. And so we're only drawing scientists from, the well-heeled on the East Coast and the West Coast, and maybe some few spots in the middle, and we're losing out on everybody else. And that is, if we're going to be competing in a global landscape with China and India, and for that matter, Germany and the UK, we have to pull in the full human capital that we have in this country. And we're only going to do that if we start them young and don't give them signals that science isn't for them. And so there's a lot to unpack in our science education.
With the politics of education, and this will be my last statement, is that if it's not on like the test, the national test or the state test, it is not part of the curriculum that the school board is really looking at. So we've got to get it on those tests if we're still going to take them. I mean, I don't know if I don't really believe in them, but on the other hand, it's got to start there. It really does.
We collaborate with the National Science Teacher Association on trying to get curricula changed. So we're working on it, Carol, but it's a long haul.
Okay, I have just a couple for you. First, on her comments, I will say that Neil Tyson and, of course, Bill Nye are national treasures, and they are an outstanding example of what we need. But the other, of course, is the old Mythbusters crew, which showed that science is rocking. They showed that failure is always an option, and you can learn something from failure, which of course are the first things that you have to learn as a scientist, right?
Absolutely.
But I have a question that's related to this, because I'm a couple years older than you are. I was a physics major, dropped out after a while and couldn't quite finish. But 76 through about 80. And what was an issue back then was the reduced amount of pure undirected science that was being done and paid for, because of course no business is going to work on science that doesn't have a payback for 50 years. That's the province of government. And government had been at the time, and as far as I'd been able to continue to follow it, that was still the case. Are we still making that mistake now? Are we not shooting out into the unknown? Because that's really what it is. It's exploration.
Yeah. We do better in some areas of science than others. So I'll tell you, biomedical research has been very fortunate because there's been investment, because hope, right? I mean, biomedical research is hope. And so because there's been investment in that across the board, yes, applied clinical research has been increased, but so has basic research, which is where CRISPR comes from, right? Which is where gene editing comes from, all that. And so you see the effect of that investment. The places where we haven't had that is in energy. We have not had it in physics. We do. We have not kept up on a per capita basis with our competition, right? We didn't build the ability to find the God particle here in the U.S. We have to go to the Large Hadron Collider in Europe, and so we have not kept up. We've been collaborators, and we put in a little bit of money so that we can take our physicists over there, but we have not kept up, and it shows. It shows, and I'm actually again in this little moment of inflection. I actually think that there's going to be bipartisan support for basic research, and it's because of a poor reason, which is that they found a boogeyman, right? They found a global competition that the politicians think is, and they'll overhype it, and they'll go too far. It happens every time, but it's going to increase some basic research, but it's not going to increase everywhere. So let me give you some examples of where it's not happening. Agriculture. Right. And food and water insecurity is a real problem. It's a huge problem.
Yeah.
And we are not investing there. And the other thing that it does, Agricultural Research Service puts a scientist in every county in America. And that scientist, it doesn't matter that you're the agricultural scientist, you become the scientist, right? You become the man or woman who is asked about anything scientific. We need that. We need that, and we've got to do better about making sure that happens.
Can I jump in, Sudeep, because you just hit my point that
Yeah.
Let's talk about agriculture and let's talk about building trust. So I'm a kid who was born in the state, raised in the Bay Area, through grad school in California, and then to DC and did the Hill and worked with the scientists and public health person background.
That's great.
Ultimately ended up in biotechnology and life sciences as a non-scientist. Worked at NCI under Klausner, right, which is great time to be there, and then down to North Carolina. So I want to talk for just a moment about North Carolina and science, because we have a way, and I truly believe this, and I grew up in a family that is ultra, like typical middle-class Jewish school teacher, liberal. My mother was at every protest march. We all were, right? Like Viva la Huelga in the fields with the farm workers. Now I go to North Carolina, freaking out, thinking, what am I doing? But leading the North Carolina Biotech Center. And what I learned is that state was the first to make a massive commitment into biotechnology economic development, but it wasn't around all the great healthcare. It was really around ag, because the farmers are inherently scientists, right? They are breeding, they're comfortable with genetics. Man, it was great. They were in the General Assembly. You could make them proud of all the accomplishments, and they got it.
Yeah.
And like now, I think if I talk here in Seattle about what North Carolina is about, it's like we have a sense, oh, it's the red states, it's the blue states, that we are so guilty of doing the polarizing ourselves instead of saying, wow, maybe we should look and figure out how we connect that science instead of in the classroom, although in addition, because I'm all about the education, and Carol would love to chat with you more about that in terms of here in Washington, is that we can absolutely make the classroom in the fields. We can make it in our oceans. We can make it all around us. Science isn't something we go to a classroom and have to learn, that we need to build trust, starting with kids when they're at babies. You can watch them at 1 and 2. You can tell the ones that are going to be the engineers and the ones that are going to be the scientists. All these little behaviors that need encouraging and support, and cultural conversations in the community about how do we work together in the fields, in the air, in the water. They know there's enough farmer out there that doesn't know there's climate change. Do they want to talk about man-made climate change? No, then we're getting judgmental. right? It's so we take it any way we can, but as science leaders, which I suspect many people on this in this group are, is that we really need to be more creative, more open, more receptive to people, more sitting down and having a meal with people before we talk about how we're going to change them or they're going to change us. But you will find it in unexpected places instead. And I think we have too much of a way. Oh, it's Fox News. It's them. It's not us. It's not MSNBC. Don't worry, we're perfect. We are just as bad at listening to what we want to hear. Is somewhere we've got to say to win, we've got to bring all these groups together and do it where they live. So I'll get off my soapbox. That was my rant.
Oh, okay, Leslie. Well, I'm from North Carolina, so I appreciate the comments about the state. It's a strange state, right? At one time, North Carolina had elected Terry Sanford as a senator and Jesse Helms as a senator.
Jesse.
And that didn't make any sense at all. Right? Terry Sanford, one of the most liberal, progressive, terrific governor and senator from North Carolina, and Jesse Helms. And you can't. How does the state do that? The same electorate, not elected both. But it just shows you that there is this. If you can connect, you're right. Those farmers, they are scientists. They support us. So to get them there. I see a hand there. Is that John?
No, that might have been me needing to get mine down.
John, France and John, yeah.
Hi, just as a counterexample, 22 years ago, 21 years ago, my wife she went as a chaperone from a local choice school here in Kirkland, a very advanced choice school. They went to Huntsville, Alabama to go to space camp.
Mm-hmm.
And they're sitting in the planetarium watching the thing, and the presenter said, you know, the light from these stars is 2 million years old. And this little voice pipes up from the audience, that's just stupid. Everybody knows the Earth is only 2,000 years old. And my wife talked to the teacher. This school was from Whitwell, Tennessee. And she went and talked to the teachers and said, what are you guys doing? And they said, we have to teach what the school board tells us to teach.
Yeah.
We do not have the leeway to do anything else. And that just still flabbergasts me.
John, it's one of the most frustrating things about my job is that I get reporting from 50 states and it's uneven across the country, right? You're still seeing seeing schools that don't teach evolution. You're seeing schools that don't teach anything about anatomy. And what we do is we actually have local scientists who go and testify at local school board meetings trying to change the curriculum. So Jim Allison, Nobel Prize winner for immunotherapy, he's from Texas, and he's not from like Dallas or Houston. He's from, I can't remember the name of the small town, but he's from a small West Texas town. And he has been testifying in his home county about the school curriculum because he says, I couldn't have invented immunotherapies, which is what he got the Nobel Prize for cancer, if I had been taught this when I was in school. In his county, he did convince them, but imagine West Texas, and there's one county in the midst of all the others that have listened to Jim, but the rest of them haven't. And it is frustrating. I agree, John. It's incredibly frustrating.
Folks, some other questions or?
Oh, man. We could talk about this all night.
Well, that's the point, at least till 9 o'clock. So.
Well, Suddup, I wanted to go back to something from your original, your opening statement, which I thought was fascinating and winning hearts and minds, which is branding. And you talked about using like an alternative name for climate change. And it reminds me how people, and you talked about polling, that people would react negatively to Obamacare, but thought the Affordable Care Act was one hell of a good idea.
Yep.
So when you're trying to win the hearts and minds of the ASS crowd, should though it shouldn't have to matter, should we make sure we focus on branding? Because in the end, we want to get the result that we need to have.
Yeah. Glenn, it's a fine line. And I got to tell you, I walk this fine line every day. I used to think when I was younger, I would have answered this question differently, Glenn. When I was younger, I would have said, no, we should stick to our guns. And we got to, if they say white, we say black. If they say green, we say, I don't know what the opposite of green is. But I have over time, after 22 years in Washington, what I've learned is that I understand that every policy argument is a slippery slope, every one of them. And so what I've got to be able to do is I've got to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I've got to be willing to brand, never lie, never give up on the truth of what I believe. So I will never say that there's not humanity created climate change. I won't say that. But what I will say is that, look, if you don't believe that, there is climate disruption going on. Do you see the climate disruption that's going on around you? And there are people that will see that and that will hear that. So I've probably changed my answer a little bit over the last 20 years, Glenn. Now I say it's a slippery slope that I'm willing to walk on because I want to get things done. I wouldn't have said that 20 years ago.
And don't let most scientists talk about science.
That's
really sad, but there's been tons of research and tons of work on that, as you know.
Yes.
And we can go back
We're
to
terrible.
the sheep.
We're terrible at it. Scientists,
We're
we talk
terrible. Let's talk about cloning the sheep with no pre-knowledge. You wake up on a Sunday, you turn on the TV, and you hear there's a sheep that's been cloned, and the next thing you see is a picture of Hitler. And the question is, are we going to have the next Hitler?
Yep.
And when that scientist participated in an NIH funded, got all the top journalists in the country together out at Cold Spring Harbor for a conference on this, communicating about science and breakthroughs. God bless that scientist. It was my epiphany. He got up with people like Gina Colada and he said, literally, he looked at us and he said, I don't understand why people were so upset when they turned on the TV. If they had been following the research, they would have understood it was the logical next step. And he wasn't kidding. He was completely sincere in thinking the average audience that watches CBS Sunday Morning is following those 4,000 papers in science that led up to cloning.
Yeah, I love my scientist friends. We really do think that we can talk about this stuff, and then we start talking in acronyms, and we start talking about publications, and it goes, people's eyes glaze over, or worse,
or they get panicked.
Yeah,
they're terrified.
Yep. One of the things that we've tried to do at AAAS is actually teach scientists how to communicate their science and to realize that there are different audiences, right? You can't say the same thing at a AAAS meeting that you can say to a local news reporter. We actually, it's funny, we have a program called SciLine where we match up general beat reporters, because a lot of the scientific reporting now goes on not with a science reporter at the New York Times or the Washington Post, but it goes on with a general beat reporter who probably covered, the last larceny in town in their previous article, and now is having to cover whatever a monoclonal antibody is for COVID. And what we try to do is we try and match them up with scientists that we have pre-trained who are local in their area, that they can either put on TV or they can get a quote in their newspaper, who have been trained to talk about science, because we know that actually is a skill. And unfortunately in academia, it's not valued yet, but we're working on it. We're working really hard at it.
It was one of my heroes, Dick Feynman. He was outstanding at it.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
In part following what he did, I've had any number of conversations with people explaining supposedly esoteric science issues. My record was 10 minutes to explain to some rather average high school graduates on how special relativity works. They all got the aha moment. And this was about 10 kids. They all got the aha in 10 minutes. And they thought they were too dumb to understand it. They're not.
Yeah. And I think that's key, Randy, is that we realize, we respect enough to know that people can get this, right? They don't have time to learn all the jargon, but if you give it to them in a way that makes sense, people get it. They get excited about it. Yeah, they get excited.
Exactly. And if I can figure out how to do it myself, somebody with training can, and we need to do that.
Yep. And so at AAAS right now, we're able to train about 100 scientists a year. We try to aim at young scientists. I'm trying to get the resources to get that to scale. But right now we do about 100 a year, and some of those people are fantastic. If you're on social media, if you aren't following we call them the if-then ambassadors. These are 100 young women scientists in every discipline who are out there in the world. We've given them a little bit of money. We gave them, I think they have grants between $10,000 and $50,000 to go out into the world and go spread the gospel of science with young people, and they are fascinating.
Well, I think you've hit the nail though. If it's not respected in academia, they need to understand the economic impetus for them to start respecting that ability, because they're not going to get funding unless they educate people. And which actually reminds me, is economics included in the sciences? I know it's dismal, but it certainly explains an awful lot about interactions and how the economy works.
Yeah, Randy, economics is definitely a part of what we consider sciences at AAAS, and they do publish in the journal Science when they have something that's not dismal.
I've got to get a subscription. Thank you.
France, I know Frances had her hand up.
Yes.
So I am not a scientist, but I studied art. And if it ever comes up again, the opposite of green is purple.
Is that right? Oh, thank you. Oh, I love it. That will come up again, France, because I have this way of getting myself into a verbal knot. So thank you. That's perfect.
Sadiq, may I ask you just a question? There's a statement that always comes up, and it's that one can make statistics say anything. How do you combat that?
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? Because even we scientists are guilty of this, right? You know, a p-value is this, you know, this thing that you can manipulate, and what you'll find is if you look at clinical studies, it's amazing how they all sort of go right to the perfect p-value. So what's obviously happened is scientists have collected enough data until they've just crossed that threshold of being significant, and then they stop. Right. And so you know that we as scientists are guilty of it as well. What we try and do is we say, look, yes, you're right. I as one person can manipulate the statistics and try and give you an answer that I want to give you. But when there's consensus, when there are scientists who've repeated my work, and that, you know, scientists, we want to argue. The way to make myself famous is to show that you're wrong as a scientist, right? So Linus Pauling published a structure of what he thought DNA looked like in early 1953. And Watson and Crick got famous, and they should have made Rosalind Franklin famous too, but they got famous because they proved that Linus Pauling, who was already famous, was wrong, right? So as scientists, it's, you know, as we try and learn the scientific process, we understand that it's self-correcting, and that, yes, I may manipulate the data, but there's no reason for these other 30 scientists to do that, because they actually want to prove me wrong, because they want to, you know, that'll make them actually look better in the scientific world. But we haven't communicated the scientific process to people, and that's shown in this COVID epidemic, right? People don't understand that we didn't know everything at the beginning, that we make mistakes, that we and we did a bad job of that. We did a bad job of communication. That as we learn things, we're going to give you, you know, we might change our guidance, and so we've got to teach that scientific process.
As a person that worked many years in probability and statistics, I find it interesting on this little subject that one of the readings we were required to read was How to Lie with Statistics. And that wasn't to train us to lie, but to recognize when other people are lying with statistics.
Yeah.
So it's part of the education in science to be aware of statistical stuff that can be manipulated. And some of it's pretty simple and people get it easily. And you can get deep into it as you want to, but having misleading graphs that cut off at the wrong place or such thing, or bad scaling or something, it's very easy to lie with statistics.
Well, it was Benjamin Disraeli who said there are three kinds of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe there's a fourth category where you take a Sharpie so that if the chart you're showing doesn't indicate what you want, you just add in the piece that proves your point. That's scientifically accepted, right, Sutup?
Absolutely. And what drove me nuts about that is that the meteorologists that are in the regional offices, these are, in the scheme of things, in public service, for those of you who've worked in the federal government, there's this GS, general schedule. These scientists are GS 12 scientists, right? They're making less than $100,000 a year. And they are doing it because they love it, right? They wanted to be a meteorologist. They care about weather forecasting, and they work for NOAA. They're in their dream job. They're doing the stuff they want to do. And here's the president of the United States, attacking them, and then telling the Secretary of Commerce to attack them for saying that they were disagreeing with the president. It's incredibly frustrating. I do think it did cause the scientific community to rally around these particular scientists, and I'm really happy about that. But my goodness, we've got to dig ourselves out of that hole too. The nice thing that I learned about this, though, is that the community there in Alabama, they saw. They saw. You can't argue with the sky, right? I mean, the sky's blue, and so they saw this, and so they actually rallied around these meteorologists who were based in Alabama, and so that was really nice to see. I did really enjoy that.
Sudip, so what can non-scientists do to help the cause that you're talking about, to help scientists make science more acceptable, move it forward in this time of inflection that you keep talking about?
Yeah. I think that there's a couple of things. One is first of all, speaking up, right? I think that it's too easy, and I'm guilty of this myself. It's too easy when you are in your daily life not to speak up for the science. Right. And I mean this at every level, because the response to the COVID outbreak has really been 330 million individual decisions. Are we going to wear a mask? Are we going to wash our hands? Are we, all those different things. And so in the opportunities that you have in your public life, whatever they are, if it's at work and you're setting office policy, if it's at your children's school, if it's when you're taking care of an elderly parent who's staying at a nursing home, is speaking up for the science. And so asking questions, for example, at a nursing home about their protocols related to antibiotic resistance, right? I mean, I want my nurses to know, and my nursing assistants and the folks who are working with our elderly, I want them to understand that, there's penicillin doesn't work anymore. And vancomycin, which is, one of those that's supposed to be a drug of last resort, actually doesn't work very much anymore either. And I want them to understand that. So being being willing to speak out a little bit in support of the science, just at that individual level, is huge. Second is hold your politicians' feet to the fire, and your friends and your enemies, because lots of people talk a good game. They talk a good game on science, and what they don't do is then actually follow through. And so with our politicians, for example, I can't get anybody in Congress to tell me they disagree with me on funding for science. But when it comes down to it, you have to get these budget allocations, these 302A allocations out of the budget committee. You have to actually increase those so those increases can be applied to the sciences. And there are really only a handful of people who are involved in that decision. There's the president, there's the Speaker of the House, there's the majority and minority leader in the Senate. And in the House, the minority leader doesn't matter, but in the Senate he does. And then there's the chairpersons of the Budget Committee. So in the House, that's Chairman Yarmouth, who is a Democrat from, oh my gosh, Yarmouth, Texas or Oklahoma. I can't remember, one of those states. But a Democrat who's the Budget Committee chairman there. And on the Senate side, it's Bernie Sanders is the chairman. And so we've got to get those folks to actually come up with a budget resolution that includes enough money in the caps to increase the sciences. Now there's a lot of pull on those things, right? I mean, it's not just science. You got to think about community health centers. You got to think about assistance programs. You got to think about education. There's a lot of pulls on all those folks, and holding their feet to the fire to say this is the time. And the argument about deficits, I always say, look, right now interest rates are negative 0.1% in real terms. If we're ever going to borrow money, this is the time. And when interest rates rise, that's not the time. So let's not let that get in our way. Hold their feet to the fire. So there's two things. One, act locally, speak up for science in every place you can. And then second, hold your politicians' feet to the fire.
What are we doing to prepare more people of color, to enter more people of color into the sciences?
Not enough, Leslie. So there are lots of interventions out there, right? And interventions are things like, oh yeah, we need scholarships. We need graduate program scholarships they're sort of onesie twosies. The problem is that there's a structural problem that we have, which is that, and this is about gender and race. We tell little girls and we tell little black boys that, you know what, even when they're in the second grade, math's you're not that good at it. Why don't you do this over here? And we give them these little signals. They're just little signals. And my own daughters have gotten this, right? Which is that, you didn't do so well on that math test. Maybe focus over here. And those things add up over time to where those folks, even when they're really brilliant, they're going to choose to go be a lawyer or go be a financier. And we need those folks too, but I want some of our brilliant kids to choose to go into the sciences. And when we beat the math out of them and we beat the science out of them at an early age, they're not going to do this. We have to stop the signals, first of all, that little girls and children of color are not good at the sciences. The second thing we got is we got to make science an attractive job, right? And what happens is it is an attractive job. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a privilege to be a scientist. But it's a privilege once you become either a tenured professor or a senior scientist in industry. Those junior levels are pretty crummy, right? And so what happens is you get this brilliant young man or young woman who've graduated from college, and here's what they got, and their parents have sacrificed to get them to go to college, right? And so they're a young person of color. And here's what you got to tell your parents. I'm 22 years old. I just graduated for you, mom and dad. You all paid to put me in college, or you paid for my food and good times. And now I'm 22 and I'm going to go take a job for $15K a year in graduate school for 4 more years. That's what you're going to tell your parents at this point in your life. And why make that choice? Why would anybody make that choice? And so we've got to make this an attractive a place for to see a future for children who don't have a parental safety net, is what I call it, right? Because what's happened even during the pandemic is you got young graduate students who are up in Cambridge or in Palo Alto, and they're fabulous, right? They're fabulous, and the pandemic hits, and if you have a parental safety net, you might say, I'm going to go back to my home in Charlotte, North Carolina, and live with my banker parents. And I'll work from here. And then that person of color who is their roommate in Palo Alto or in Cambridge, all of a sudden can't afford the 2-bedroom apartment they've been sharing, and they don't have a parent to go home to. And so it's that kind of thing that really makes it to where we've crowded out the pipeline. And I'm hopeful there as well. I think some people see the structural challenges, and it's not, again, it's on race, it's on gender, and it's on geography.
And it's on funding, right? Look at NIH funding. It
Oh,
is
yeah.
even when people become
It's
scientists.
tough. It's a tough
When you're
gig.
a Black scientist, you are not competing.
It's tough. Yeah. Right now, success rates for Black scientists are around 21% at NIH, and 31% for
Right. That's
for
a
white
massive
scientists.
difference. I mean, it's horrible. We want them all to be successful, but that's just appalling.
It is. It's tough. But we have a lot to do there. William, I see your hand up.
So I'm actually new to this group. I just moved here from Louisiana, which is last on that U.S. News and World Report, state report. So went from worst to first. And in Louisiana, we have all these cult-like problems that we've already touched on, and we have a blue dog Democrat. You probably know what blue dog is. It's a Southern phenomenon where you have a Democrat that's pro-life, pro-gun, and pro-oil, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I mention that because a lot of times people divide their politics on like social and fiscal, and they may be fiscally conservative but socially liberal. One of the things that helped me personally escape the politics of my state and how I was raised is understanding that they're the same, that fiscal policies are social policies, that tax policy and government spending and healthcare, these are social policies. So to build on Leslie's question, what in Sudeep, in your world with Science Magazine and lobbying and your fellows, how much can Science Magazine and your work further the march for social progress and social justice?
Yeah, it's a great question, William. So, and yeah, it does build on Leslie's question because I think we can do a lot. I think we can do a lot. So there's an issue of science, actually sitting on my floor right now. You can't see it, but oh, I'll tell you what, I'm going to show you. I'm down in the basement of my house because my daughters are asleep upstairs. So I went down to the farthest room. But I'm going to turn off my virtual background so you can see this cover. So this is the cover of Science from like 2 months ago. No,
oh yeah,
maybe about a month ago. And this is a study of a big data study of policing in Chicago. And what it shows is it's looking at different races of the police and different races that they stop, and just looking at stops that are not about violence, not about a call, but just traffic stops, other types of non-violent interactions. And the data is incredibly compelling, right? Incredibly compelling that there is a difference in how police treat African Americans and how they treat white people in Chicago. So again, the data is about Chicago, so I can only say about Chicago, but it's incredibly compelling, incredibly powerful. You don't need, statistics. It's funny, when I worked in NIH, we used to talk about the clinical trials where if a drug really works, you don't need statistics because you see the data, you see it jump. Same thing here. You don't need statistics to see that there's a difference in how our Black Chicagoans are treated versus our white Chicagoans. That study probably wouldn't have been published in Science 10 years ago. Because when you discover the newest subatomic particle, people are going to put that in Science, right? That's exciting. We're going to publish that in Science. It's the fundamentals of physics. When you discover a disparity in the treatment of people, that 10 years ago we would have seen that as belonging in Science, but because we see the social sciences as being able to drive policymaking, our aperture is opened up. And that's partly from diversity in our own ranks, right? We had to have editors at Science who, look, we still want scientific excellence. It's got to be great science, but open the aperture on what's important and impactful. And so that piece there, that got covered in all over the country. I can't remember the number of hits around the world, but thousands of hits around the world. And what it's also done is that we then incorporate that into some of our advocacy work. And we talk about the fact that there is data out there that we can get using these databases that we need access to, police databases and others, and that we can apply the scientific method to this data and actually help and help inform policy. What we don't do is we're very careful, William, not to prescribe policy from AAAS. Like we don't go with the here's the answer. That's not us. That's there are other organizations that do that, and that is their jobs. We're the folks who are going to say, here's the data, here's what the science says, and we stop there, because otherwise we lose a little bit of credibility, because we need our partners at Amnesty and our partners at Greenpeace and others who are willing to go just a little bit farther, and they're willing to be tougher and that sort of thing. And that's good. We need them. We need the whole spectrum. We inform their work with the science that we do.
Thanks. I didn't realize that. I let my subscription lapse. I fessed that up. So.
I will tell you, it's changed. And the editor-in-chief is now Holden Thorpe, who is just a terrific editor-in-chief that I'm incredibly proud of. Give it a look. You might not recognize it. It's
welcome to Washington State, William.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks.
Well, you're right. It does look different. I just wanted to point something out that you probably already thought, but so much of what we've been talking about tonight really comes down to pointing out the economic advantages of science, pointing out the economic advantages of having a larger pool of really prime candidates to choose from. That was one that I'd heard a couple of years ago, that just like never thought about that, but it's obvious. If you can quadruple the pool of potential scientists, you're going to have a lot more geniuses to work from. And so it's colossally stupid to continue these racist policies.
Yeah.
And this is I know I get hopped up a bit on econ because it was a throwaway distro class for me. If I ever go back and finish, I'll have double major in math, physics, and a minor in economics, because it was easy.
Randy, there's a great chart that previous editor-in-chief, that a guy named Don Kennedy put together, and here's what it said. It was imagine an X and Y axis, right? Yep. And on the X axis, imagine let's see, it was the disciplines of science arranged by the difficulty of actually learning them. Yeah. All right. So you can imagine that the hardest one maybe is mathematics. And then there's physics, and then there's and you sort of work your way down engineering, and you get to the life sciences and biology, and you make your way down. And I know that don't judge me. This is 30 years old, so some of these things can be argued. But the social sciences, and at the very end was economics. Okay, that was the but then on the y-axis he put perceived importance to the public. Right. And it was the exact opposite. Yep. Right? Economics was at the high end, and mathematics was at the bottom. And it was this beautiful little graph that just said that it's completely inversely proportional. If it's the harder the science and the math, the less perceived importance to the public. So
yes, and yeah. I had an econ TA who told us economists are nothing more than failed mathematicians. And he says, if you can't handle a tiny bit of calculus theory we use here, he pointed to the next building. He says, you go to the business school. And that's the reaction I get out of everybody who's been in academia. But yes,
that's great.
Siddhi?
Yes.
You talked earlier about how on Capitol Hill, a lot of the politicians and other people are concerned about China as a threat. Scientifically as well as other ways. How do you feel about it? And if you do believe they're a threat, what makes an authoritarian country that's coming up economically but still somewhat poor such a threat? Or what are other countries that are doing things better than we are?
Yeah. Oh, it's a great question. So we are under attack. so I have run businesses at a place called Battelle, which runs some of the national laboratories. I've worked in the Senate. And now I'm at AAAS. Our cyber footprint is constantly under attack, and it's usually coming from China or Russia, usually. So that's true, and there is a concerted effort to gain intellectual property. That's all true, and I have no doubt that our major corporations are under that attack as well. That said, at the basic research level, there's a lot of collaboration that goes on, right? Basic research, we don't have a whole bunch of intellectual property. We want to publish. We want to get known for doing this. We want to be the intellectual fathers and mothers of these ideas, but we don't necessarily have intellectual property. And so there's this fine line that we're walking, right? Where there is intellectual property that is under attack. And so we need to make sure we safeguard that, both with laws and also with cyber protections. We need to make sure that there's transparency in terms of scientists in the country and if they are getting research funding from China, because we're transparent about the US funding. So we should be transparent about that. But after that, we need collaboration, because I want it to where that young scientist who's at the Fred Hutch in Seattle is talking to her counterpart in Suzhou, right, in China, because over the next 30 years, those two people are going to have to save the world at least 4 times. And I need them talking, and I need them collaborating. And so we've got to, again, the slippery slope, all policy is a slippery slope. We've got to protect the intellectual goods. We've got to make sure that Boeing still has patents on its airplanes and that sort of thing. But we've also got to make sure that as we're doing basic science, that we are out competing, that we are still at scientific crossroads that brings people in, so that the best scientists in the world still want to come here. We got to make sure we're getting the best science out of South Chicago and Oklahoma and Palo Alto. We've got to be able to do both those things in order to compete with China as well. There's no doubt Xi Jinping is not a good guy. He's not a good guy. No doubt about that. But there are many, many scientists in China who've been trained here and who share our global culture of science. Let's not screw that up. Let's not screw it up by putting up our own walls. Let's make sure we're collaborating.
And let's not kick them out after we get them fully educated, get them their doctorates or postdocs.
Oh, goodness, yeah.
Are you using data to help with that, since you're not doing policy work on that? It's so obvious on the immigration policies what needs to happen. But how is AAAS? How are you engaging in this conversation?
Oh, pretty loudly. So I've testified on this as well. I end up testifying on the Hill way too much. So yes, and I wrote an op-ed just back in July called, I think it's something like "Immigrants Help Make America Great" or something like that. Because during that time, President Trump had put a temporary ban on visas into the country, all around in terms of the sciences, for students that were coming in. And so I wrote a piece that was talking about how, some of our, I can't remember, 38 of our Nobel Prizes in the last 40 years have been from first generation Americans. It's remarkable, the scientific output from immigrants. So we need to be, we have to be willing to, again, we don't throw bombs at AAAS. That's not us, but we present data, we present facts. And I'm not afraid to say that if we turn off the spigot of great scientists coming to this country, that's the dumbest thing we could do. We need the scientists that are homegrown, and we need those immigrant scientists.
Set up, I think, another important reason that I think you made an important point about funding is that, and I think I'm right about this, that the Trump administration before COVID had actually cut funding or cut positions or cut whole departments that were involved with infectious diseases on the belief that a manufacturing philosophy of just-in-time delivery, which works well in the auto industry isn't how you fight global pandemics and science. You can't wait until there's a pandemic to go, hey, everybody, let's organize an anti-COVID department. It's got to be up all the time. So would you speak to that, please?
Yeah. So for those, this is going to be too simplistic. A quick government 101. The president proposes budgets, and the Congress gets to actually control the power of the purse, right? So the president's budgets in the Trump budgets in the first 2 years were horrific, right? They wanted to cut NIH by 30%. They wanted to cut EPA by 40 or 50%. They wanted to cut the State Department by 40%. Horrific proposals. The Congress, even when they were Republican controlled, didn't go along with them. And the budgets stayed flat or grew at most of the science agencies, EPA and NOAA being the two outliers that were cut. But the president did, in the National Security Council, he eliminated the part of the National Security Council that was supposed to be monitoring for pandemics. And that was a huge mistake, because the National Security Council, if you don't sort of follow Washington, it's an incredibly powerful and useful tool. It's a bunch of analysts who are pretty nonpartisan for the most part, who are just sort of monitoring things. And they're monitoring, who's about to go to war. They're monitoring troop movements in parts of the world that, I can't even name. They're monitoring flow of economics in terms of if there's going to be a cash crisis in South America. They're monitoring all of that. And they had a part that was supposed to be monitoring pandemics. And that went away. It was actually taken down in the first year because that is not a congressional decision. That actually is an executive office decision, and I think that was very harmful to us in the first stages of the pandemic, because it made us blind. We've been blind for 10 months on this thing. We're finally starting to get some bearings now, where we've had good diagnostics and some good reporting. But we're 10 months into it. Now we're almost 12 months into it. I feel good about our reporting now, but gosh, what if this had been a little bit more virulent, right? What kind of tragedy this could have, the tragedy is already there, but it could have been even worse because of those decisions.
Cindy?
Yeah.
Eric Johnson. I was avoiding the draft and went into the Air Force during NAM. Came out, went on the VI Bill, got my computer science degree, and went into technology and computers. Worked through that for a number of years and migrated through in technology through my whole career. Now I'm almost ashamed to say I worked in that area because of whether it's ethics, whether it's whatever, we almost destroyed the world on all the hacking that went on. Computers are almost our downfall, and all of the cheap, dirty junk that's put out now through computers. How does the science morph that badly to almost destroy our country?
Yeah. Eric, I'm with you. I got to tell you, I blame almost everything on the internet, right? I mean, it used to be that in Congress, when I first got to Congress, I got there in 2000, which seems like, it seems like a modern era, but it's 22 years ago now. And at that time, Ted Kennedy could go out on the floor and give a blustering speech full of fire and fury. And then he would go and he could go cut a deal with Orrin Hatch, and people would trust that he got the best deal he could for liberals, and that Hatch got the best deal he could for conservatives, and that we got, we did okay. And that was because every word he said wasn't captured. Now, if he gave that same speech on the floor and then he came out with a bill that was a compromise, people would attack him for being for lying about what he said. But, I mean, it's incredibly constraining because politicians are by definition two-faced. They have to be two-faced to get elected. There's no other way to get elected, because you've got to be all things to at least 51% of people. And so we kind of ruined it. But to get back to your original question about technology, it's like fire, Eric, is what I think it is, right? And I got to imagine that when the cave people first found fire, that they were burning themselves up, they were creating causing forest fires, whatever, and it was incredibly damaging until they figured out how to do it well and got a culture around fire, right? There's probably some caveman fire safety culture that got built. And right now we're living in this era. We're living in the birth pangs of this era of unbelievable connectedness. And I don't think we've even seen the half of it, right? I mean, it's going to get much more connected in this next generation. When I see what kids do now, it's just going to be even more connected. And we've got to figure out the culture that comes with this technology, that comes with the great power and the great risk that comes from these technologies. And I don't know the answers to it, Eric. I do think that I do think that we as thoughtful people need to start putting out ideas about what that means. What does that mean? Does that mean that should the culture be that that our kids do unplug at some points of the day? How do we build that culture? And I think that thoughtful people everywhere have an obligation to speak out about these things and try and drive that cultural change. But I don't know the answer. I wish I did.
Well, so much of the environment has been taken over by greed. Facebook started out college doing whatever he was doing, but then he found out how to monetize it. Twitter figured out how to monetize it. The person that in Sammamish here that provided a internet connection to the right wing groups that shouldn't be on the line, they're making money. It's all greed. It's all money now. So it's figuring out how you monetize the next little widget or next idea that's basically destroying the respect for that science that drove it there and made it so easy for them to do that.
Yeah, and Eric, I think that one thing that can help, it's a blunt tool, but it's federal regulation, right? I mean, when you think about television in the early era, until there was a lot of regulation about spectrum and a lot of regulation about codes of conduct on air, words you couldn't say and that sort of thing. That's when it sort of calmed down. Now, was that perfect? No, it wasn't, because there was a whole bunch of stuff that went on because of that was wrong. But you need that pendulum swing, and I think we've gone way too far in the unregulated in terms of our online world, and maybe that pendulum needs to swing back I don't know if the answer is antitrust. I mean, breaking up these big companies is one thing, but they're competing with global behemoths too, right? You pare down Facebook, you got Alibaba, and you got Tencent and a whole bunch of others in China just waiting to clobber some small company here. So I don't know that antitrust is the right thing, but definitely regulation that sort of put some brakes on. Let's take a moment to breathe. As a nation of 330 million people, let's take a moment to breathe online before we again swing the pendulum back to unregulated, because we've got to take care of the hate speech. We got to, how do we build a culture that doesn't troll? I mean, we used to be able to teach manners. How do you teach manners on the internet? We got to figure that out, and maybe some regulation to slow things down for a while wouldn't be a bad thing.
I'll follow up by saying that both Satya Nadella, thanks, Satya Nadella and Brad Smith, top people at Microsoft, have both written books recently, Hit Refresh and Tools and Weapons, speaking specifically to endorsing the need for governments to step in and regulate things like AI.
Yeah,
they are very pro-regulation. We need to get behind that, because not all big tech giants are.
Yeah, I agree with that. Microsoft has been out front on that compared to the others.
And that's a pretty big sea change for them, going back 25 years too. So yeah.
You're right, William, and that segues into something that I was going to bring up, because Sudeep, you're just young enough that you might not have been fully aware of the big sea change that Ronald Reagan made in terms of regulation and everything else. And one of the things that it's more than just the regulation, though. living through that time as an adult, it was remarkable how anti-science his entire administration was. Oh, they like science for building big bombs, but forget anything else. Now, are you very familiar with that particular period? Because
I am.
it's strong.
Yeah. Look, a lot of government is such a blunt tool. You know, I've worked in Congress 10 years, and if you want to, affecting change in Congress is a powerful way to do things. It's a very blunt tool. And so if you say, gosh, we've had way too much regulation of some things, the pendulum will inevitably swing too far and open up too much. And the Reagan era, it just gives you that in spades, right? The tax cuts, you got a whole bunch of regulatory things that changed. You got a whole bunch of things related to mental health that really, really did a number on us in terms of the homeless population. The sort of slow response to HIV/AIDS, all of that certainly born in that era. There is, again, I don't know that we'll ever get to perfection, so we have to keep swinging that pendulum, and I think it's time to swing that pendulum back a little bit towards regulating these large companies.
Maybe nudge it, but not quite so hard this time.
It's a tough one. It's a tough one, Randy. I wish we could get it right. I'm sure we'll go too far, but you know what? We need to do that. We need to tap the brakes. Otherwise, we're going to get ourselves, I think we're just in a tailspin.
Good point.
Well, anything else or other questions? So, Dave, I've got one. If you're a guy from North Carolina, why are you wearing a hoodie it says Ohio State?
Yeah, it's a good question. I worked at a place called Battelle, which is a large R&D organization. Their headquarters is in Columbus, and they made me go to Ohio State football games. And it turns out that they wanted you to be wearing the paraphernalia. So I bought this at Target one night in Columbus, and it's what I wear in my basement when I'm cold.
A Buckeye.
Okay. Yeah. I got plenty of Carolina gear as well.
One more question. Where were you during the Capitol riots? I hope you weren't there.
I was not there. I was in our headquarter building, which is what that virtual background was, which is about 3 blocks away. A scary time. I worked on the Hill during 9/11, and I still make a pilgrimage out to Shanksville once a year because my office was in the Appropriations Committee room, which is, you look at the dome on the Senate side, you sort of look to the left, it's right there. It's a beautiful, beautiful office. It's got beautiful Bermuda paintings, and if it wasn't for the people on that flight that crashed in Shanksville, I don't know that I'd be here. And so I look at the Capitol policemen this time who I think put themselves into harm's way, and I feel the same about them and the staff and the lawmakers that had a few minutes to get into safe rooms. Just a remarkable time. It's hard to put this into context yet for me. I feel like I need some history around it. I need to see what unfolds from this, right? In the 1930s, there was a riot in DC, and it was World War I veterans who were wanting their pensions. And they rioted. There was worry of a coup. This is around the time that communist governments are taking, or socialist governments are taking over in different places. And it's sometimes forgotten, that era is forgotten. And it's forgotten because we pulled ourselves out of it. It wouldn't be forgotten if we didn't pull ourselves out of it. And I think that's where we're at with this thing is, are we going to pull ourselves out of it? Do we look into the abyss and step back, or was that just the prologue to an era that's to come? And I don't know the answer to that, and but I will say that Washington is not the same. You know, I think that, you know, in the course of my life, we've closed off the street that runs in front of the White House. So that's I Street for the, you know, for those of you who've been there. So it used to be you could drive on that. Now you can't. H Street in front of the White House. And so that's been closed off and made into a plaza. And then fences have gone up. When I first got to Washington, you could walk into the Capitol building unescorted and walk around and, you know, go visit whatever you wanted to. That changed after 9/11, and walls went up and fences went up and bollards went up. I'm afraid we're going to do that even further and just disconnect us even further from our government. And that's a shame. It's a real shame. And I don't, I think that as citizens, we should be telling our Congress that we don't want that. You know, we want safety for them, but let's figure out a way that stuff can pop out of the ground. I'm willing to spend a little bit of extra money so that on a regular day, people can still walk up to the Capitol building, because it's a privilege. It's a privilege to get to do that, and we need to be able to do it as citizens.
Last call for questions on that. Well, Steve, I want to thank you for a very stimulating talk. I really enjoyed it and sharing your expertise. And I actually want to build on a couple of things you mentioned. On the 23rd of this month, we're having our open forum Drinking Liberally group, where we get together and just talk without the benefit of a speaker. But you were talking about deficit financing on some science initiatives. And on the 25th, the book that our Reading Liberally group is reading is Stephanie Kilton's The Deficit Myth.
Very nice.
And so, you know, we're trying to be very topical and look at that. And next month, in March, April, and I don't have the date right in front of me, but it's always the second Tuesday, there was a lot of discussion about food and agriculture. We're going to be talking about the Farm System Reform Act that Senator Cory Booker has proposed, and that Slow Food USA is one of the groups leading the charge in trying to get that passed. And we have a representative from Slow Food USA and an allied group who will be talking about that. So if you like to eat or find it's necessary to eat to survive, and concerned about climate change and the other things that agriculture impacts, you might be interested in participating in that. But again, Sudeep, we really want to thank you for taking your time. I know it's late there, but been very stimulating. I've got a lot out of it. I would encourage everybody to consider membership in the AAAS or other ways to support the scientific community locally and nationally. So one last call for comments or questions, and otherwise we're going to make it a wrap.
I just want to say to Sudeep, thank you for fighting the good fight. We certainly appreciate you, and we appreciate that you don't get discouraged when you have every right to be, or even if you do get discouraged, you keep plowing right through anyway. So thank you very much. And we'll do what we can to try to support you to make your job just a touch easier.
You're here.
Thank you. No, that's wonderful. Hey, this has been an absolutely fantastic conversation. It's wonderful to spend some time with you. I wish I'd been able to fly out to Seattle and we could do this for real. Maybe sometime in the future. But it's wonderful.
Let's plan on it.
I'll get together.
There are a few people on here who are new and aren't aware of Drinking Liberally. Like everyone, other groups, we've had to go to Zoom. But the idea of Drinking Liberally is that bars are safe places to talk about politics. And we were meeting at the Pomegranate and had a lot of good camaraderie. And hopefully, both Carol and I have been vaccinated. I hope many of you have been. And maybe we are looking at that proverbial end of the light at the end of the tunnel, and can sometime soon go back to meeting in person. And so, yeah, we'd love to have you come out here to the Emerald City and have you as our guest.
I would love that. And then I won't be drinking tea. All right. To
Like
all
I'm
of
the
you.
only one
We
drinking
would
at
insist
this
on that,
meeting.
yeah.
Cheers.
Thanks for staying up so late when you've got kids that I suspect will wake you up way earlier than you are ready for at this point.
They will be waking me up. So, but I'm used to it. So it's all good. Thank you all. Have an absolutely wonderful evening. Thank you. I
Good
enjoyed
night.
it.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
All right. Anything else for the good of the order? Otherwise, just repeat, the 23rd, we have our open forum group, Talking Liberally. 25th, as I said, is the reading group, The Deficit Myth. You still have plenty of time to get the book and read it. And then next month, we're going to be talking about the Farm System Reform Act. So a lot of stuff to talk about. So let's keep fighting.
Thanks for the reminder about that, Bud. I see it's available on Apple Books, so I can start right away.
Yeah, and we've started to read it, and it's very accessible. It's not a lot of deep economic jargon, so I think we'll enjoy it and found it very useful.
Yeah, I want to find out what the difference between MMT from an expert is to standard Keynesian economics, because there doesn't seem to be much divergence until one predicts things falling off the cliff and the other one doesn't.
Yeah, that's to find out.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody.